The member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This bill highlights a range of issues which are very dear to the hearts of Gippslanders and I suspect all rural and regional communities. And I seek to make several points in relation to a key aspect of the bill to extend the Roads to Recovery program from July 1, 2009 to June 30, 2014. And I notice in the gallery today we have some of the departmental staff, and I can just encourage them to keep up the good work because out in Gippsland we love the program and long may it continue. In my handful of days in this place, I've had to listen to a lot of rhetoric from the government in relation to a range of issues in question time as it desperately tries to rewrite history and attack the legacy of the previous government. But to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever attacked the Roads to Recovery program because it stood the test of time as a great policy initiative driven by the former Leader of the Nationals, John Anderson, and implemented by the coalition government. And I refer to a statement by Mr Anderson in 2001, which I think explains the simple beauty of the Roads to Recovery program, and I quote, "Local councils right across Australia have embraced Roads to Recovery and demonstrated that the government's decision to give them discretion to determine their own road funding priorities has been absolutely correct. Roads to Recovery is helping build the social and economic infrastructure of local communities, enhancing road safety, access to education, health care and other amenities, and creating sustainable jobs." As I said, Deputy Speaker, it's a great program and it has stood the test of time. I'll focus on the issue of road safety in a moment because I believe that if you fix country roads, you will save country lives. And that's one of the key reasons why major investment in the regional road network by all levels of government is so important. But back to Roads to Recovery. And local councils in my electorate have repeatedly told me they love this program. It bypasses the state government and lets them to decide on the best course of action in their local area. It really does build on the common sense of local councillors, and I'm a very strong believer that it goes to the heart of local people developing local solutions to their own local problems. And I have a great deal of respect for councillors in these local areas because they have that knowledge and the practical experience of their local area. They get to set their own funding priorities and they actually gain maximum value for their region as well, because on many occasions they can then package the work in a way that makes it more efficient for contractors if they have to travel to the region or for their own shire staff. So Gippsland has perhaps benefited more than most, and I take up the point made by previous speakers that I tend to think it was because of the good work of the local member and based on need rather than any allegations of pork barrelling in relation to this program. But Gippsland has benefited more than most. Gippsland had to the tune of about $28 million in the past 4 years, and that's a very significant sum of money. But I think that reflects that Gippsland has the vast geography and a network of roads and bridges which demands such significant investment. East Gippsland Shire, for example, has 2,719 kilometres of roads and 230 bridges, and many of them are wooden bridges. And as we'd all be aware, the wooden bridges are well past their life expectancy in many cases in the Shire of East Gippsland, and the council is in desperate need of additional assistance in the future. Wellington Shire faces very similar issues, and I've met with my local councils on a regular basis to discuss their concerns. And although work has started in many cases over a period of years through Roads to Recovery, the work ahead of the council is never ending, and I think that probably reflects the needs of infrastructure investment in our regional areas. Wellington Shire in particular, 3,168 kilometres of roads, 100 concrete bridges and 77 timber bridges, while Latrobe City, a somewhat smaller municipality, but still has 1,500 kilometres of roads and 71 bridges. And quite simply, the task in front of these councils with their restricted rate base and their very limited opportunity to raise additional revenue makes the Roads to Recovery program just vitally important for them. I argue that Roads to Recovery should not just be extended into the future in terms of timelines. I would encourage the government to work towards increased funding in the future. And having said that, I acknowledge the government's commitment because the $350 million per year is a very substantial investment I regard as a very positive step in the right direction and a continuation of the good work of the Nationals and the previous coalition government. Because the need is enormous and councils will continue to struggle to keep up with that infrastructure demand in the future. Our bridge network throughout Gippsland is deteriorating, as I mentioned before, and councils do have that very limited capacity to raise funds themselves from rates or other sources. Deputy Speaker, I must stress that roads and bridges are going to be the critical arteries in the Gippsland region for a long time to come. It certainly links our towns for economic and for social activities, and we're going to rely on our private vehicles to move throughout our region on an ongoing basis into the future. It's one of the main reasons why I've actually campaigned so strongly for an increase in the single-age pension, because we need further support for our carers and our people with disabilities and our pensioners because in the Gippsland environment, with the amount of cost involved in fuel and travelling throughout our region and the importance of strong, safe local roads, will always be a critical element of life in the Gippsland community. Fuel costs do have a disproportionate impact on regional people, and pensioners and people on low income certainly fall into that category, and our regional areas are so dependent on private vehicles for work and pleasure. I urge the government to continue to take action to assist pensioners and low-income earners in this regard, because although public transport is something that is gradually improving in my electorate, it will never serve the more rural and remote areas of electorates such as Gippsland. And I have written to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development in relation to this issue after the matter was raised by local constituents and the Wellington Shire Council in particular. And in terms of passenger movements on the public transport network, I note that the numbers east of Traralgon are rising faster than any other part of the state of Victoria. And while the delivery of public transport services is primarily a state responsibility, previous Commonwealth governments have co-funded major infrastructure and rolling stock improvements. So I urge the Minister to jointly look at funding public transport opportunities in Victoria, in addition to this great work that we're doing here with the Roads to Recovery program. Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned in my inaugural speech just a couple of weeks ago, Gippsland is a world-class producer, and we need the further investment in our transport links, not just for those social opportunities and in terms of safety, but also to move goods more efficiently to and from our region. Our timber industry, our agricultural sector, our food manufacturers, and as I'll point out in a few moments' time, the tourism industry itself in Gippsland all relies very heavily on a good road network. Deputy Speaker, programs like Auslink and Roads to Recovery are significantly important in regional areas across Australia, but none more so perhaps than in Gippsland with the Princess Highway project. And major projects like the upgrade of the Princess Highway east of Traralgon and all the way to the New South Wales border are essential developments for my region. It's good to see there is some bipartisan support for it. Although there has been a lot of talk about duplicating the Princess Highway east of Traralgon under Auslink, but Gippslanders really are looking to see more action from the current government. And I must say that I was surprised and disappointed by the Minister for Regional Development and Local Government, who attempted to use that particular highway upgrade as an opportunity to score cheap points when speaking in question time recently. The Minister was correct on that occasion in claiming that I had written to his office in relation to the $140 million required in upgrading the highway. But what the Minister didn't tell the House on that particular occasion was the project was actually promised by his own government, and the Prime Minister himself has repeatedly made the promise in relation to the highway duplication project. So I was somewhat disappointed that the Minister didn't provide an update on progress on his own promise and really attempted to belittle the people of Gippsland and the Shire of Wellington, on whose behalf I had written to his office. I have subsequently written, of course, to the Office of the Prime Minister to get an update on the progress of this important project. Because, of course, Deputy Speaker, the upgrade of the highway mustn't stop at Sale. We need upgrades right throughout the Gippsland region, through to Bensdale and into the future, and something I'll work with the government on whenever the opportunity presents. Of course, members who are familiar with the OSRAP star ratings will know that the stars are awarded to roads depending on the level of safety which is built into the road. And the safest roads attract the 4- and 5-star rating, likely to be straight, have features like 2 lanes in each direction, separated by a wide median, have good line marking, wide lanes and sealed shoulders. But the highway through Gippsland only attracts a 2- and 3-star rating in most areas, which the RACV regards as unsatisfactory for a major highway, and I certainly support the RACV's position. In the far east of my region, the highway between Orbost and the New South Wales border is in urgent need of safety upgrades. The road is regularly used by very heavy vehicles and the increasing number of grey nomads towing caravans or driving the larger recreational vehicles. So the highway is very narrow, it's windy, has many sections where the lack of sealed shoulders is a major hazard for us. And work has been undertaken in some areas, and I do congratulate both current and previous governments for the work that has been undertaken. But there's an enormous amount still to be done, and I urge the federal government and the state governments to work in partnership to improve the safety of the Princes Highway right through Gippsland. I want to comment just a little bit further on the need to build safer roads, and which I think is a critical element of the Roads to Recovery program. Because sadly, as we're all aware, a disproportionate number of people continue to be killed or injured on country roads, and that includes my electorate of Gippsland. I know we've all been touched by by road trauma in our own lives through family and friends, but in addition to the deaths we've experienced, the serious injuries are quite horrific, and there's a long recovery process. And Deputy Speaker, some people never fully recover from those accidents, and In addition to this huge emotional toll, the shattering of families, there is also a significant economic toll, if I can be so crass to measure it in these terms. So the investment in better roads actually makes economic sense for governments as well, because every dollar we spend on improving road safety has an economic payoff as well as a social bonus to us. Which brings me right back to road funding in regional Victoria, and particularly the Gippsland area, which of course I'm most interested in. The Victorian road toll, Deputy Speaker, has trended downwards over the past decade, but unfortunately the regional road toll has remained disproportionately and stubbornly quite high. During 2007, a total of 27 people were killed on roads in the East Gippsland, Wellington and Latrobe city areas. And this year, unfortunately, the trend is worse, and it's prompted a major effort by Victoria Police in terms of trying to improve driver behaviour and cracking down on illegal activities like speeding and drink driving, that type of activity. And I strongly endorse the police in their efforts, but I recognise that it really is only part of the answer. And Deputy Speaker, in my previous role in the State Parliament Victoria as a Chief of Staff, we pushed a very strong message out in the community that if you fix country roads, you will save country lives. And I make that point here again today. If we fix country roads, we will save country lives. And I refer to the Auslink report from February this year, and I quote from that report that most crashes occur when ordinary people make everyday human mistakes. Sober, drug-free, responsible drivers obeying the speed limit and wearing seatbelts frequently die on our roads. Safe roads minimise the chances of these crashes, and if they do occur, they minimise the severity of the crash. Now, the Auslink report goes on to make what I believe is a very critical and a salient point for us all to remember, and one that governments should acknowledge. Safer roads have the potential to save nearly as many lives as safer vehicles and improved driver behaviour combined. And further, it goes on to say, if we improve the safety of roads, improve driver behaviour, improve the safety of vehicles and adopt smarter safety technology, we will save as many as 700 lives every year, most of these through modern, safe roads. And this is not solely, of course, a federal government responsibility, and all three levels of government are involved in road funding, which I must admit often adds to confusion in my community. We're sometimes unsure about which level of government we need to go to in terms of responsibility or in terms of funding for black spots or upgrades to certain roads. I simply reinforce the point, though, made by the RACV that there is a funding shortfall in road construction and maintenance in Victoria. But I do believe the previous government deserves to be commended for initiating the Roads to Recovery program, and I'm pleased to see that it will continue after 2010. I congratulate the current government for that. And also, of course, be making sure that my electorate of Gippsland receives its fair share of the funding pool, and will work collaboratively with the government to improve road safety in my electorate in the future. Deputy Speaker, the bill also amends the definition of a road so that it includes the heavy vehicle facilities such as rest stops and parking areas, which is another important component. And I mention that in the context of discussions that I've had with transport operators in my electorate. And the land transport sector is certainly doing it tough with increased fuel costs and high interest rates and strong competition from some of the larger operators. But there are many small business owners who are struggling to meet the overheads of running their trucks in what is a very competitive environment. They are telling me they're nervous about their futures for them and their families, with the Rudd Labor government proposing to increase taxes on trucks and some of the confusion over the heavy vehicle regulations between jurisdictions. The operators are telling me they can't understand why the government is pushing for a massive increase, for example, in registration charges, with B-doubles increasing from $8,500 to $14,000 per year. They make the point very clearly that B-doubles are a very efficient way of moving freight, and these small business owners feel they're being unfairly targeted by this approach. They simply can't pass on the cost, and they simply can't boost their rates, so they're running the risk. I think we're running the very genuine risk where some of the small business operators will be rescheduling their maintenance or cutting some corners in the future, and servicing may be cut back, and again that could have an impact on safety. I think everyone supports a safe working environment, particularly across our transport sector, and my attention has been drawn also to the state transport regulations, including the national heavy vehicle driver fatigue reforms. Opposition members have already expressed their concern about the lack of uniformity between states on these regulations, but I'm concerned with the lack of services in my region in particular to comply with the law, because one of the key issues for the truckies in my region is the provision of rest areas. Now, there are very limited facilities along the major transport routes linking Gippsland to Canberra, Sydney and beyond. And in the absence of these safe rest areas, it's difficult to understand the somewhat heavy-handed approach and the extraordinary penalties which will be handed out for relatively minor logbook infringements, and this is causing a great deal of concern in the transport industry in Gippsland. And with no disrespect whatsoever to many of the operators in my region, they are excellent drivers, but to be fair to them, bookwork is not always their strongest point, and we must avoid making this process of the logbook too complex and time-consuming. It becomes another inefficient impost on a small business operator. I'm concerned that some of the small breaches in terms of timing and filling out their logbooks and areas in the logbook process are set to be hit with somewhat significant fines and the demerit points, which will severely affect the opportunity for these small business operators to earn a living in the future. I think there is goodwill on behalf of the transport industry, but I think we need to make sure that we have some reasonable tolerance and common sense must prevail in this issue. And just on a further point in relation to the rest areas, which is an emerging issue, and I'm not sure that members in the metropolitan area would be aware of it. It's the growing force of the grey nomads I referred to earlier. And for those in this fortunate position to own a recreational vehicle and possess with that desire to get out and tour our nation, and we certainly welcome them in Gippsland. But the tourism infrastructure needs must be upgraded to meet these modern demands. In Gippsland, there's quite an emerging pressure point developing in our community where the large recreational vehicle owners and the traditional caravan park operators, it's fair to say, aren't necessarily getting along very well. The RV owners don't want to pay for a site in a caravan park because their vehicles are largely self-contained and they don't need the facilities which are on offer. So many of them are actually parking illegally in our streets and on our parks. But it's a very difficult concept to prove when the owner of the vehicle can certainly argue that he or she is just resting and that it would be dangerous to force them to keep driving. So I raise the issue in the context of this bill because it is an emerging issue in regional areas, and we're going to need more funding to provide these rest areas which meet the demands of the modern traveller in regional Australia. In addition to the heavy transport industry, you'll find that a lot of the recreational vehicle operators are very keen to stay in the rest areas. There's safety in numbers. If we provide the toilets, the shower facilities and the associated facilities, they will certainly appreciate it. I know toilet pump-out facilities, it's not the most glamorous piece of road infrastructure we can talk about, but it will certainly add to the holiday in public's enjoyment of our regional areas and get rid of that friction point we're developing at the moment in some of our many country towns between the caravan park operators and the RVs who don't really desire to pay for a site because it's basically a self-contained vehicle. So I think state and federal governments, both past and present, have not managed to fully support the regional tourism industry and allow us to develop the opportunities that exist. And I think this is an important piece of infrastructure which I would certainly promote and encourage the government in the future to provide. But certainly providing safer and better roads along with the infrastructure and the quality rest areas has benefits for the tourism sector as well as the heavy transport industry. And I know from my own experience in Gippsland, once we improve roads, improve the links between our major towns, in this case from Melbourne through to Gippsland, the increased traffic we've experienced as a direct result of government investment in roads like the Pakenham Bypass, and I congratulate the state Labor government for that. It's certainly developed into a major link for our region and certainly benefited the tourism and small business sector. So in closing, I certainly support the investment of the Roads to Recovery funding in upgrades to the rest areas and parking facilities which will lead to a safer roads. And there appears to be at least some level of bipartisan support for a major government funding in these vital roadworks to improve safety and our transport efficiency, and I welcome that. And I certainly look forward to working with my community to ensure that the needs of Gippslanders are not neglected in this process. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.